feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck. Alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Here comes the boom, Matt. Ready or
Boom!
not.
Here comes a boom! Ready? Have you had that stuck in your head? Because I have.
Yes.
And I don't.
How you like me now?
It has nothing to do with this movie other than the title being Tick Tick Boom. But
which is also just disappointing because I would like to see a film
POD
adaptation musical based on the album Satellite.
Click, click, boom, baby. No, today we are reviewing Lin-Manuel Miranda's Tick Tick Boom, starring Andrew Garfield, Alexandra Shipp, Vanessa Hudgens, Judith Light, Joshua Henry, and more.
Robin DeJesus.
Robin DeJesus, yes, good. That's the one lead cast member I was missing. Thank you, Eric. And more. Eric, I tweeted out something the other day where I was like, I am sick of Lin-Manuel Miranda.
He's everywhere, Matt.
And that's a bunch of different things where it's like, I love Hamilton. I put it on my best films of the year last year, even though it was just a, video recording of the stage show. I think it is a phenomenal musical. And, I knew of Lin-Manuel Miranda from Moana, as well as there was another Disney thing I think he was involved in as well, animated.
Well, he's also doing the script for, or the music for Little Mermaid.
He is, but I mean, that's coming up. But I mean, before Hamilton, I knew from Moana, and I guess Mary Poppins Returns before I saw Hamilton. And then this year, it seems like he's the only person who can write musicals, as they have him. They adapted his first musical, In the Heights, which everyone knows my thoughts on. If you listen to the show, I did not like it. Vivo, another kind of I'm like, why? This is just the same thing but animated and a monkey, and like, it's just not great.
Which he voices.
And then Encanto, which we will have a review out very soon for. But that tweet sparked from Encanto, where I was like, I don't know if I need more. I'm all Lin-Manuel Miranda out. I don't necessarily think it's bad.
He's just overexposed.
And
that's not necessarily his fault.
No,
with the exception
God,
of him taking the
get
jobs.
The money, dude. Like, I mean, I understand.
Exactly. It's more so Hollywood not being original,
just
or
latching on to one person.
Yeah, not reaching out to other people. It's like, okay, you're going to be the musical guy for the next 4 to 5 years, and everything that has to do with musical based adaptations
until we get
or
sick
movies.
of you.
I'll take him any day over the week over James Corden.
I agree. I like Lin-Manuel Miranda. I think he seems like a super nice, kind of down to earth guy. I just think, and his sound is so specific that I think it can become tiresome very easily, at least to me personally, where, the spoken, rap musical parts of his stuff. And I mean, he can play in many different genres of the musical, but, the Hamilton thing is what, made him who he is. And that's what people want when they hire him for music, right? For the most part. So you get a lot of that in Vivo. You get a lot of that in Encanto. I mean, In the Heights, obviously, because that was his first musical, is a lot of that as well. So that's a long lead up to leading into Tick Tick Boom. I'm like, oh my God, we watched Encanto like 3 days ago. I'm like, I don't know if I need more Lin-Manuel Miranda, this being his directorial debut. I don't know much about Jonathan Larson other than I knew he was the creator of Rent, which I have never seen. So other
than in the Simpsons,
sure,
that episode where Homer stars in Rent, where he's the landlord.
Yeah,
you need to pay the rent.
Yeah, that's good. That being said, I didn't know much about Tick Tick Boom, other than I did not even know it was based off of one of Jonathan Larson's like earlier works and things like that, like a one night only show I believe he put on, which then was turned into a stage show after his unfortunate passing. But that being said, I'm excited to talk about this because I had no idea what to expect going in. I kind of expected, Lin-Manuel Miranda directed it, so it's probably going to sound like everything else he's done. And I
Well,
was very, very wrong.
there's also another strike against this movie going into it, is that Stephen Levinson adapted it, and Stephen
Yeah.
Levinson is also responsible for Dear Evan Hansen.
Sure.
So
Sure.
it's like, okay, you have someone who right now is, in the sort of Hollywood overexposed circle. Like you also include people like, I mean, we talked about it with Red Notice, Gal Gadot and Ryan Reynolds and Dwayne Johnson. It's just like, okay, Hollywood doesn't really have any creativity when it comes to finding, talent beyond, the archetype.
The
And
handful of people, yeah.
yeah, and Lin-Manuel Miranda is one of those guys.
And then you have Brian Grazer and Ron Howard's name on it as
yeah,
well.
with Imagine Entertainment. So you're thinking, oh no, oh no.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think this will be one of the things we will also discuss as well. Matt, you maybe know a little bit more about musical theater than I do, just because you have a sister who's very much entrenched in it,
Sure, yeah.
and it's very much her passion. Where like outside of a couple things here and there, Andrew Lloyd Webber and things like that,
Sondheim, who's
yeah, I mean,
Bradley Whitford.
yeah, who's actually very good in,
Yeah.
in the cameo role that he has, is something that is kind of, it's a different world altogether. But you can also look at it from the point of view of like, okay, well, it's not too dissimilar from like setting it in Hollywood,
Sure.
and sort of looking at it behind the scenes of making it in the film industry. It's just the difference here.
There's
is
some
that
parallels there for sure.
It's Broadway, and Broadway is almost seems as a tougher kind of thing to get into, especially for someone like Jonathan Larson, where he is a very creative individual. He is kind of quick to come up with sort of rhymes and sort of jingles that can turn into something more with storytelling and structure and things like that. But at the same time, that doesn't matter, because there's so many creative people that are coming to New York at any time. But given, especially in the early 90s, where he's struggling to break through but also make ends meet, and he's working at this diner, and Jonathan Larson, the Rent playwright, is played here by Andrew Garfield, who gives one of the most heartfelt and sometimes heartbreaking performances. And I think it has a lot to say, and this is where I think it really is universal, is that you have somebody that is struggling to kind of get their foot in the door, but at the same time, it's kind of telling you that you shouldn't put all of your eggs in one basket, and that you need to continually be working on multiple things in order to kind of pitch to other producers and workshop and things like that. But on top of it, you might be this genius, this boy genius, as he's dubbed, because it takes place, the framing device is that he's turning 30 in about a week, and that he's also performing his play Tick Tick Boom. And the structure of that is very similar to the movie Lenny, about Lenny Bruce, the comedian, directed by Bob Fosse, who obviously a very big influence on Lin-Manuel Miranda, who played Roy Scheider in the Fosse Verdon FX series, which was about the making of All That Jazz.
Yeah.
So you have this kind of framing device of him telling his story on stage, adapting his play of Tick Tick Boom, which this movie is also an adaptation of Tick Tick Boom. So there's this weird kind of meta thing going on. But again, like, it doesn't let him off the hook for being a boy genius. And like, he's not a horrible person, but he is maybe somewhat absent-minded when it comes to the people around him,
because he's
also
so focused on himself and his
Yes.
career, right?
and what's going on around him, because
Yeah.
this takes place in 1990. He's about to turn 30, but it's also the backdrop of the AIDS crisis, specifically in New York. So there's a certain connotation that comes with that. His friendship with Robin DeJesus, who is a former actor now working as an ad executive. His girlfriend, played by Alexandra, Shipp, is
Shipp,
probably
yeah.
best known for the more recent X-Men movies, playing Storm. She is was a once promising dancer who had an unfortunate injury and now has recovered, but can't kind of get back to the glory days. So she's deciding whether or not to take a job in the Berkshires, and he doesn't really want to go, and he's kind of putting off, having that talk with her and being selfish about it as well. And on top of all that, he's basically living just about or just above poverty as sort of
Mm-hmm.
the story unfolds.
Mm-hmm. I was shocked at how much I loved this. Like I really, really do love this movie. And so that kind of goes back to comes full circle of I'm not Lin-Manuel Miranda out, I guess. And I actually think he has a promising future as a director. But yeah, a lot of what you were just saying, like I think the story to me was incredibly relatable, not knowing much about Jonathan Larson, but just the kind of being a creative and following your dreams and never kind of giving up, but then also not being too precious over your work and trying to kind of do it in a smart way instead of investing 8 years into one project and things like that. But then how you should never give up if it's something that you really love and you really want to do. There might be a better way for you to do it, or for you to still focus on the people around you or on other projects and things like that, but to never give up on your dreams. And I just thought the framing device, what you said, I think a lot of conversations we have about movie musicals when they're adapted from a stage show is that it just never translates properly. I mean, Dear Evan Hansen, perfect example. But many other ones where we've had this really interesting conversation with a lot of people, both that love musicals and live musicals and movie musicals um but there's always to me a disconnect when it's adapted to screen. When you take away that kind of window of sitting in an audience and seeing it performed live, I feel like when it's translated to screen and it's usually a direct adaptation, it either comes across as incredibly corny, or when you try to set it in the real world, when someone just breaks out into song, there's just this kind of thing that, at least in my head, just this warped kind of disconnect where I'm just like, this just doesn't work. But then the best ones are either adapted directly for the screen, like they are original musicals for film. So they're thought as those as a movie first and then a musical. And then this does a really interesting thing with that framing device that I think works in its favor, of that this was originally a one-man show, right? And then that's kind of how the movie uses that framing device. And then it was eventually, I think, into a 3-person show and things like that. So I really think it's smart to have the framing device of him performing this musical, Tick Tick Boom, kind of not just a one-man show, but he has some backup singers which play into the kind of narrative that we get. And then you're getting the bits and pieces of his life that he's telling in this stage show, and we're seeing it in a cinematic format. So you can kind of take those liberties of like what he's doing on stage is the real life kind of thing, and then the version we're seeing is him telling that story on stage and performing it, but we're seeing what was in his mind, or the little heightened version. And then that framing device just helps immensely of buying into it. And I think the movie is also really smart. And you go back to the Boy Genius stuff and him writing this, and him, after the failure of his first musical, and this is kind of what he follows up on, and it's always write what you know, or write about your life. I think it is wonderful because I think it's like satirical and both playful, but like you said, very emotional and very human as well. Like I think the music itself, why I really loved it, is that much like even Book of Mormon and other musicals that I've really liked that I've seen, is like it takes the musical theater kind of genre and kind of doesn't deconstruct it, but is playful with it, in the sense where it uses different styles, or different styles of musicals and different things like that. And it's kind of poking fun at itself and poking fun at musicals, but it is still very much a love letter to musicals, and how this guy really, really loves them and understands them. And I think each song kind of sounds different than the last one, and it keeps up this energy throughout the whole movie that I just really, really bought into. And every song, and even if it would start one way where I'm like, oh, this is kind of weird, or getting into that corny kind of weird musical theater territory that I don't like, it would win me over by the end. Like whether it's them talking about the apartment that they both live into, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of bad. And then I'm like, oh wait, no, I totally bought into this by the end. And then the Sunday Brunch song, which is your more classical Broadway kind of thing, but it's about these
with a
morons.
ton of Broadway actors,
Yeah.
right? There's a ton of cameos,
and that is just
scene.
making fun of those style of songs in a Broadway musical, but just talking about Sunday brunch at this diner and how everyone's an asshole. And like, and it's kind of that throughout, where, you know, you see a little bit of, like, I've heard music from Rent, so you see the influence, like with the beginnings of that there, of the rock musical, but you could just see how talented he was, and ironically not all of his stuff sounded exactly the same. And and then I just really connected with it being, you know, we're, you know, just past 30, right? And, you know, I've been very open about struggling of, weirdly, I worked in advertising and fucking hated it. And like, so that whole sequence of him going to
the focus group,
and then him talking about advertising, and like literally there are lines in that sequence that I have verbatim said to Nevis or whoever of why I didn't want to work in advertising anymore. So it just kind of really hit me hard. And then someone who's always wanted to work in the arts or, you know, in the film industry, whether it's being a film critic or originally wanting to make movies, which Eric, I think you were in the same boat too. And anyone who kind of starts loving film wants to be a director, and then they realize like, okay, maybe that's very, very hard to do. But then never giving up. And like, I just think that's really wonderful. And I like the relationships in the movie. I thought Andrew Garfield fucking crushes it. Like, I think, like, I was shocked at how great he is in this. I've always liked him, but I just didn't expect a role like this from him, and for him to just absolutely knock it out of the park. And I think everyone's really good. And sorry, I'll shut up now, but I really, really liked it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a great mixtape musical, and I think that's kind of what it is. It's this combination of styles all really coalescing together in a way that works. You know, you even have a hip hop track with
By
Black
Tariq.
Thought.
Yeah.
And I love that moment, especially the payoff of that with the Cats reference. I thought was actually very funny.
So good. Yeah.
But then on top of all of that, you have this kind of, you know, you mentioned it with the turning 30 thing, and like I thought about Bo Burnham's Inside as well, but
I thought about Inside a lot as well.
But also like there's this interesting sort of idea of not just turning 30, because I also watched The Souvenir Part 2, and there's this whole sort of interview where the protagonist of that film talks about like, oh, I hope to have more things to say when I turn 30 because I'm about to, and things like that. So you think like, okay, well, this is like this new sort of like midlife crisis for people as well. And like the idea that, you know, Jonathan Larson at this time is also putting this additional pressure on himself to be the next Stephen Sondheim or Sondheim or be the next, you know, Paul McCartney or you know, John Lennon, in terms of like, okay, they had these things that they accomplished before they were 30, so they set the bar then, and it's like I'm supposed to now be the person who has the talent and I should be surpassing that, but I'm going to barely scrape by. And, you know, I have this sort of dystopian play that I've been putting 8 years of my life into, that I still don't have 2 songs in the second and final act put together, but I'm basically sort of running on this high, or running on fumes based on what Sondheim told me to do, you know, almost a decade prior. And I like that scene as well, because you mentioned satire. You know, you have Sondheim sitting in on this workshop and sort of kind of being the guy that listens and thinks and really is a good poker player, where like you can't tell what he is actually sort of, you know, going to say. And then before that, you have the kind of yes man played by Richard Kind kind of saying, oh, it doesn't work. But it's as soon as Bradley
Sondheim
Whitford
says something,
it's like, okay, well, I have to contradict myself.
I actually thought of that first.
Yeah. Well, what I actually mean is I agree with that, but it wasn't. But it actually is.
He's trying to get Sondheim to agree with him, but then Sondheim is the one that like, you know, actually knows what he's talking about. Yeah.
And then like it's also kind of making that distinction. It's like, okay, well, like there are critics, and then there are the artists that kind of have their own sort of way, and that's why Sondheim is Sondheim, and that's why everybody else is just kind of like Richard Kind's character.
Sure. Yeah.
And like just little moments like that I think really work. But again, I do really like the idea even something like the 40-year-old version, which we talked about last
Hmm.
year, Rada Blank's movie, where again, like, you put this pressure on yourself to deliver something based on, you know, early praise or potential that you feel you've never lived up to, and like that struggle, and also just being like from the point of view of writing. I think, like, you mentioned, being in marketing and sort of how it's kind of soul sucking and what have you, but like even as a writer, to come up with something that's both clever and insightful, and especially when you're on a deadline and you keep on procrastinating, or you just don't know what to put into, that final line, or how to kind of start things off. Like, I think that's also very relatable to people that, you know are within the creative field, that's not just, musical based or Broadway. I think that there's a lot to say there, and again, just somebody struggling to get by on, a waiter's salary. There's a great line about, like, when are you, a musician or an artist, but also a waiter, and then when are you just a waiter with a hobby? Like, I think, like a line like that is kind of interesting as well, because like it's like, when do you get to a point where you kind of have to pack it up, and like there's
I mean,
that conversation to have
it
as
is, and
well.
I've had that conversation with myself, right? Of with this show and being, a quote unquote film critic and things like that. Like, I think at one time I was a advertiser with a hobby, right? And
Yeah.
then like, and that's ultimately, I didn't necessarily give up, and I don't think I have yet. And I think we've had modest success here, and you even more so. But like,
But it
I
takes time. I mean,
it
I've been
does,
doing this
yeah,
for 15 years now, and it's like, it's never been overnight, and like I'm still at a place where it's like there's still exponential growth, and like
yeah.
that's the thing that Jonathan is learning through this, one moment in his life,
And you don't need to
where,
have everything by 30, or you don't
no,
need to
no.
like, yeah.
And you need to kind of branch out in terms of, working on multiple things. Like, I've never been one that believes in multitasking, but at the same time, you can't just put all of your eggs in one basket and say, like, this is the thing that is going to save me, or this is going to be the thing that, propels me into stardom. Like, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't. It's the same way with, like, putting everything on a relationship. It's like, this is the person that I'm going to be with,
Hmm.
forever, and like, I've put all this time and effort into it, and sometimes it doesn't work out, and you have to be ready to hear that rejection.
Yeah. And I think the movie is does a really really great job with that. Yeah, I've been wanting to go back and listen to the soundtrack. I was just
3090
Yeah,
specifically.
just the whole thing is just great. I think again, there's not one song, like even a couple of them I go, "Oh, this started a little bit weird." Like by the end of it I was like, "No, this song's also a banger." And like I understood what he was going for. I love the fight song, essentially, like the therapy song between the couple, like in the juxtaposition there of them, actually arguing, and then the song in the background. Like, it's just playful, and I think it's very creative in the way that it's, giving you those messages, or kind of playing with the musical theater genre and stuff like that. And you can see, obviously his first musical didn't work out, but then this was that thing where you could go, oh no, this guy had a very promising career ahead of him. And, obviously Rent lives on to this day, and as does this movie, which I think this was maybe lesser known, because it was such a, I mean, musical theater people probably knew about it, but we're not that. But because it was just a, one man show and things like that, and Rent obviously is his bigger thing.
Well, even with
Um,
Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? With In the Heights, like,
yeah,
In the Heights did well, but it wasn't Hamilton. And I'm sure maybe even Lin-Manuel Miranda felt like, like In the Heights for him was going to be the thing that was going to catapult
yeah,
him into superstardom. But sometimes it's the third or fourth thing down
yeah,
the line where it's like, you see promise in the person, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the thing that they've presented to you is this fully formed,
hmm,
insular piece of work. It takes time to create the voice and build, and you
totally.
have to be patient, and if you really want it, you'll eventually get there.
And I can see why he was probably inspired by Jonathan Larson a lot, and that, obviously why he wanted to direct this movie. And I think he does a good job. Like, I think, again, it's playful with the styles and the cinematography, and switches up how the look of it for each different musical set piece and things like that. And I was kind of really impressed by it. And I think uh, I will be. I liked this because it was a little different than those things, and he was just purely directing it, right? And you can see the love that he had and the inspiration he had by this guy, where it wasn't necessarily written and directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Like I like that he takes a step back and goes, okay, I want to showcase someone else that really inspired me. So
Yeah, he
I
does have a cameo as a short order
sure,
cook,
which he had to, but
but you know what
I
though,
was
that's
yeah
fine. It's
yeah
such a small little thing. There's also a Ghostbusters reference.
yeah
But yeah, I think as a filmmaker, I you know, like again, this shows a lot of promise. I don't know if it's necessarily a masterwork. It's a
sure
really talented guy
first
who
effort yeah
first effort, and I think like maybe if he does a couple more of these movies, like whether it be, you know, Broadway adaptations or biopics or something like that, and has, you know, the vigor and the kinetic energy that is in this movie, then it'll be really exciting to see what he does for film 2 or 3. And maybe he'll have his version of Rent that is, you know, the a film version of Rent, not the film version of Rent like adaptation wise, but
sure
like on that level of like, okay,
of
this is,
success of like yeah
yeah,
whether it's an original musical or him adapting something else, and maybe he
or
doesn't
yeah,
just stick with musicals, I don't know, but like
because Bob Fosse was
um
another guy that didn't just stick with musicals. I mentioned Lenny being about a stand-up comedian, and like, I mean, obviously Fosse went down this very dark path with Star 80, but Star 80 is far from anything he did previously. So
yeah, and that could be really interesting, and that's what I kind of hope he does, because like what I was scared about, which is I mentioned right off the top of the show to bring full circle, is that he would just keep getting hired to do that, just people going, okay, give us Hamilton but it's a kids movie or
right.
give us Hamilton. Like I could just see studio people being like, if he presented some music and they're like, yeah, but can you make it sound more like Hamilton? And like that's what I worried that we would just get over and over and over again. And this is great that they're like, someone's like, no, you want to make this movie, it doesn't need to be Hamilton. It can be its own thing. And then I hope that he's even able to do even more that's, you know, not necessarily just an adaptation or whatever. And I will take like again, if Lin-Manuel Miranda becomes the guy that's going to direct movie musicals for the next little while, if this is successful, I'm almost okay with that, because you know we had what Rob Marshall for 20 years, and who else directed every musical known to
Well, I
man.
mentioned
But
Bob Fosse did a
yeah,
few of them as well, but I mean, Rob Marshall and me is not a great filmmaker.
no, that's what I mean. But he was the guy who was like, oh, we need to do a movie
Oh
musical,
no, totally.
like
And I totally get that, but yeah, to your point, like I think if Lin Manuel Miranda continues down that road, I hope that he kind of is able to lock into the style of musical that is required, and not just bring, to your point, the Hamilton, you know, canon that a lot, like I see that focus group so clearly for him, where like he goes into a room where, like, you know, or a pitch meeting where, you know, he's talking to a Disney executive or somebody at another studio, and they're like, okay, we've got this, you know, animated kids movie that we need this song for, can you write it? And he'd probably be like, yeah, sure, I mean, you're paying me and blah blah blah.
sure, yeah.
And like the notes are, it's like more like Hamilton.
Yeah, and that's I could see that being very very frustrating. And he's shown range too, and I don't want to just put him in a box where you know, not every song in Hamilton sounds the same, and that's where it goes back to the inspiration of Larson, that I think is like, I think Lin-Manuel Miranda aspires to be able to write a lot of different music that's not just that rap kind of spoken word thing that Hamilton was sort of known for. There's other genres of music in Hamilton even as well. And I think that I hope he is not put in that box, because I got to that point where I'm like, I'm all Lin-Manuel Miranda out, but I'm back on the LMMM train, baby. LMM? Did I have one extra M? I don't know. I'm gonna
The
give it a four
extra
and a
M is
half.
for
More like Lin-Manuel Miranda.
especially with that wavy hair.
Yeah, he's. Did you see everyone saying that Andrew Garfield looks like Kramer in this movie?
Well, no, the
It's
person that I thought, like, because I was
Nevis
thinking,
said it, and then I started to see it online, like on Twitter, people
right.
being like,
I
"They
was
should."
thinking more of Eraserhead because
Oh
of,
yeah, yeah,
like, he could be young Eraserhead, and
yeah.
especially because he just worked with Jessica Chastain, who looks like the woman in The Radiator. So you could have a young Eraserhead musical with those
Yeah,
two together.
love it.
Somebody should Photoshop like him with the hair next to her as
Eric,
Tammy Faye.
you have a Photoshop subscription. Get on it.
Yeah, that would be terrible.
I'm giving it
Photoshop
a
is my passion.
4.5. I loved it. I thought
I'm
it was
gonna give
great.
it a 4 out of 5.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Thank you all for watching or listening. We really, really do appreciate it. We have many more reviews that you guys can check out. Almost 300 of them. I think we might be at 300 soon. I got to check the numbers, but I'm trying to make
Check
it
the
so
tapes.
I want Resident Evil to be our 300th episode. But we have many other reviews that you guys can check
Resident
out
Evil,
right now.
House of Gucci.
Yeah. House of Gucci, Resident Evil, Ghostbusters Afterlife. We just recorded King Richard. I always immediately forget what we just recorded. And we'll have a review for Hawkeye out on Tuesday as well. So lots of stuff right here on Untitled Movie Reviews. You can find it on YouTube and podcast services. We also have 2 other shows we would love for you guys to check out. Untitled Movie Podcast. Eric and I talk about our trip to LA in our recent episodes. Go check that out. Over on the conversation side, we have a Disney Plus Day discussion. We're also going to have a Ghostbusters Afterlife spoiler cast. Should be up soon, but check out that feed. One-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. Everything's over there. It's the easiest spot to find everything. Once again, thank you for listening. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can find me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Let's get Tyreek to play Old Deuteronomy.